All right. Well, I mean, I have 3:30, so if you want to get going, I
Sure.
guess we can go going. So hey, welcome everybody that's tuned in to this live stream. And I guess I'll welcome people who might be watching the recording because I know we've gotten requests to record this as well. This is kind of experiment. I've never done this really. And Sam, I think you said you've not really done live stream.
First time I tried it.
Yeah, yeah. So we're here to talk about like super nerdery. I mean, this is I don't know if you could get any more like MLS nerdery than what we're going to talk about. But I believe Mr. DeBord. By the way, if you want to introduce yourself real quick, uh, Sam
Sure, I'm
DeBord,
Sam DeBord. How are you, everybody?
and you are the
I'm CEO of Real Estate Standards Organization,
right
and
on,
none of the opinions expressed today are the positions of the Real Estate Standards Organization.
or any other entity that you may or may not be
Any other
affiliated with.
entity,
That's right.
personal
This is
opinion.
strictly personal opinion. All right. And I think you just kind of reached. I mean, this all just kind of happened on the fly, like earlier today. So, what do you want to talk about?
Well, we usually argue on the blog.
Yes.
But, I saw your recent post about clear cooperation is, what's the title again?
I think I said disaster in the making.
Disaster in the making.
Yeah. In fact, this is
And
the post right here. You know.
and that's I love the imagery. I spent a lot of time with Inman, and they taught me a lot about getting those readers in. So that's a beautiful image. And I was going to write a comment on the post, and I thought, really, does anybody want to read 6 paragraphs of comments on a post again? Probably not. I don't know if they want to see us here either, but maybe we could just chat through some of it
Faster. Yeah.
and really just dig into the details.
Yeah. And then this way, like, if anybody has questions or comments in chat, it looks like we can see it. So, we'll just like try and get people in and like have that discussion. So.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, what did you? I know you love the imagery, but what else? First of all, do you agree that clear cooperation is a disaster in the making?
No, I obviously don't. And I had the privilege of working with the folks at NAR on that over about a year-long period. As I was lucky enough to be NAR's liaison in MLS and data management the year that clear cooperation went through. So worked
Right.
with all the folks, all the execs who went through the advisory board, all the committees and board, et cetera, to put the policy through. I fully understand that there are people with some pain points around clear cooperation, people who want improvements to it. And so we can kind of dig into some of those details.
Yeah.
But I think the most interesting thing to me was whether it was Glenn, whether it was you, whether it's my personal opinion, I kind of think we're all looking for the same end result here. And there's some very different ideas about how to get there. But I think it's becoming clear that there's a real angst in the industry about truly producing this honest, transparent, cooperative marketplace.
Yeah.
And there's probably some things we did in the past that we need to start carving out.
Yeah. I agree with that. And so you understand, I mean, look, I've been commenting about clear cooperation back when we were calling it Ocho, right? So I mean, I want to put this context, like, I think the biggest thing that I wrote around clear cooperation was I really appreciated the objective, right? And I even said I appreciate the work that you and all of the other people have done to try and come up with something. My thing was pretty much limited. I mean, I don't want to say pretty much limited. My biggest objection was office exclusives. Right. So I wrote a post, back in 2019, saying this loophole needs to be closed. So I remember sort of closing that post by saying, because it was like right before the board of directors, I think, was supposed to vote on it or something. I said, vote for this, but he immediately sent it to committee and remove office exclusive loophole. Right.
Sure.
I know you remember that.
Oh, yeah,
So,
clearly.
the genesis of this for me was coming back to it is because we got some updated data. So again, let me go back to this. And when you said Glenn, I know you meant Glenn Kelman, not like Glenn Sanford or, Glenn Phillips, who's on this. So Glenn Kelman writes this post, I think like day before yesterday, maybe yesterday, talking about how the percentage of pocket listings have gone up from 2.4% in November 2019 to 4% in March. And so that's a 67% increase, right, year over year, or during that period. And yes, Glenn took kind of a very sort of racial angle to this, and I thought it was just a big distraction. That the real issue here is office exclusives, because what he called pocket listings, he actually called it out, and it really was because of this office exclusive loophole carve out, in clear cooperation. So, he ends by talking about NAR should get rid of this, right? He actually says two things. One is big brokers should just stop this, right, voluntarily. And my response was, why would they? Because I think actually office exclusives are a business sort of benefit. Like, you should do this. Like, I'm a consultant. If I were advising a big brokerage, I think I'd be telling them, absolutely go do this office exclusive, right? I mean, yeah, it might be bad for the industry, but, if my client is the brokerage, I have to tell them, like, this is really smart. And then he said NAR should think about doing this. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, better late than never. That's kind of where that's at. So, I mean, what's your take on it?
Well, I think that we kind of have the same objective. I personally am of the opinion that we actually have enough options, enough competition, enough different ways for a consumer to have the privacy and the exposure that they need in all kinds of different ways in the marketplace, and we can go into those. But I do think we'd be better off without office exclusives at this point. So
right.
The issue is, I think, is how it's framed. If we're going to ask the industry to make a significant change, then we need to be very clear about what the background is and that it's not that simple. Clear cooperation does not have a loophole. It doesn't have a carve out. It is a very narrowly tailored policy, which affects listings that have been marketed by MLS participants and their agents that clearly need exposure because they're marketing it to the public, and yet the broker is not sharing it with the other participants in the marketplace. It's disingenuous. Either it needs exposure or it doesn't. So that's a very specific thing. Office exclusives are totally separate. In fact, they've been around since the 1970s in NAR policy. So it's understandable that people are just becoming aware of office exclusives. I know, Rob, you know more than this, but a lot of folks, their first time touching that was around clear cooperation. And they said, whoa, when did NAR give these office exclusives out? Well, they've been around forever. They've been codified in NAR's antitrust portion of their policies since, I think, 2004. So we're talking 16, 17 years at this point. And when limited inventory markets come around, they get used more because
yeah, for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Let's say for obvious reasons, brokers use those more often because they can get a quick sale. They can get the seller their price, which is one of my least favorite lines. So clear cooperation did not create that. Now, does it touch it? Absolutely. If you have an office exclusive and you go out and put it on Zillow or Realtor.com or Facebook, you've proven to the marketplace that this needs public exposure. So it needs to be shared with the other brokers because you're a participant in the MLS. But, I understand why people want to look at clear cooperation and make it one thing, standalone, succeed or fail as it is, and blame all of the other limited inventory issues we're having with coming soon. There are a lot of things happening that the enforcement of clear cooperation and the difficulty of that in some markets has created discomfort for associations and execs who have to do that work. But that doesn't make the intent of the policy wrong, and nor does it disallow us from extending it, from adjusting it, to adding more to it. So there's a lot we can get into there without saying clear cooperation is the problem, because it's not. It's one piece of a very broad policy framework that's really on a continuum. So that next step, some folks would say, is removing office exclusive at this point, which obviously some folks have said that's the next step. So I'm talking a long time, but just to finish that part out, when you said we should have gotten rid of it at the beginning when we did clear cooperation, what the sausage making looks like on a national level.
Yes.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So you're trying to push something through a 1.4 million member trade organization with 900 board members that goes through an advisory board, goes through 3 committees and a board of directors, and the stakeholders are big brokers, small associations, big associations, MLSs. You put too many friction points on that thing and it's not going to make it through the chute. So I'm not going to say everyone involved in that said, yes, next is office exclusives, but that's a very deep thinking, pragmatic group of folks who did not leave unintended consequences on the table. they know there were very well-intended consequences that might need to be adjusted with later, but pragmatically, how do you move the ball forward? And I think, from my experience, I think that's what was the mindset of those folks involved.
Okay, so I guess, maybe let me start by asking you a question, because you're in the room, right? And we have comments like just streaming, and I'd
Yeah,
love to kind of
I
get
need to
to.
take a look at these.
I'd love to get to some of those, but I want to kind of start prepping this and see if we could get to some level of agreement, and then we'll see if we could address some of these points and comments. When you were in the room, and again, I'm not asking you to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not asking you to, reveal anything you're not supposed to. But I guess the thing I'm curious about is, how was the Office exclusive issue? How was it even brought up? Who brought it up? Like, what were the conversations around that? Because, because from my perspective, there are two big problems with the loophole as it exists. Number one, that it exists. But number two, the fact that it's really not an Office exclusive. It's a broker exclusive.
Right.
Right. So, and I wrote this, when it first came out in 2019, I said, wait, this is not an Office exclusive. I mean, that to some extent I could kind of understand from a pragmatic standpoint. Like, look, you can't stop agents from going into the office meeting, telling the other 10 agents around the table, hey, guys, by the way, I have a listing coming up. If you have a buyer, send them my way. This is brokerage exclusive, which meant that in an era when we have essentially national brokerages, right? Like, they could share it internally in a way that a boutique broker simply can't. So with that said, how was this brought up when you guys were talking about it,
Yeah, so both parts. First was just simply realtors saying, I look stupid in front of my clients. We go out to show properties. My clients say, hey, this is on Zillow. Hey, there's a sign in the front yard. These other brokers are members of my MLS, right, and I can't find them the information. So I sit there in the car with my clients and call the phone number on the sign in front of the house. This is not what was intended by the Realtor Code of Ethics, by cooperation rules in the MLS. This is a basic breakdown of the cooperative marketplace. So that was first and foremost how this issue came to us. And then obviously people talked about the more nuanced things that you talk about. So if we're sharing, can we share within an office with a brokerage? There's no good answer there. If you can share with everyone in a brokerage, then versus everyone in an office. Well, what's an office? And everybody says, make it an office instead of a brokerage. Well, EXP's got a statewide office. So now if you change that definition, all of a sudden EXP is the big winner versus maybe Compass is the big winner in one situation, maybe a franchisor is a winner. There's no way really to have something perfect, except that NAR already sort of defines what a brokerage is. So the term office exclusive has been around for 50 years.
Yep.
NAR defines what a brokerage firm is. The most pragmatic, again, you're going to get sick of me saying that word, way forward is to use a current definition that doesn't need an industry redo, which is we kind of know who the principals in a brokerage firm are. And that's how the group got to where they were.
Okay. All right. So so you guys knew that this was brokerage exclusive when you did it. You just kind of adapted the language. All right. Absolutely. So here's the question now. 2 years later, we're looking at it. And again, Glenn Kelman's data, I mean, it's the only data we have, as far as I know, right? So we have to take his word for it that, that the number of pocket listings have gone up 67%. Now, the thing that I guess I'm wondering about this is this. If I remember correctly, the whole origin behind clear cooperation policy was because of coming soon, right? It was because that's kind of what I remembered.
Some of it.
So in other words, a lot of agents, a lot of brokers are doing this coming soon strategy, right? So they're like, okay, we're going to sign this listing, right? And we're going to have like a 15-day, 30-day coming soon period where we have to, quote, take photos and do whatever. But we know that's not really what was going on. And they were putting it all over Zillow. They were putting it on their website. They were they were just really marketing this property as a coming soon. And if that happened in double-ended deals, wonderful. If that happened in whatever, you know what I mean? Like there's a huge benefit around it.
I think
and then that led to what you described, the realtor sitting in the car looking like an idiot because like, wait, this property's on Zillow. Why don't I have any information about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of it. I think it was a disingenuous coming soon that was the issue, that folks were listing properties saying it's coming soon. Clearly it's not. It's being shown. It's being advertised. It's active. And so the intent of clear cooperation was to put a bright line in the sand. and say, does your client need exposure or not? And if they
Right.
don't, that's okay. Hide that listing and tell your client you're hiding that listing. And if
Right.
they do,
Right.
then you've got an obligation as a broker participant to give them that
Right.
exposure to other brokers. So coming soon, yes, it's related. Some of those issues are related. But you said in your post that clear cooperation effectively takes away coming soon. It takes away disingenuous coming soon. But MLSs have coming soon statuses where you list the
Sure.
property, you can't show it, you can't, you may be able to advertise it in some markets, but it's a legitimate, we need 2 weeks before we show the property and sell it. So it doesn't take that capability away from brokers. It just makes sure that we're actually being honest about what we're doing with the listing.
So the problem I think I had with it, and why I call clear cooperation policy a disaster in the making, right, is because you're right. Coming soon sucked. Which again, so I want to point this out. I was very much in support of doing something about coming soon, clear cooperation policy. And again, I don't want to get too, well, fuck it. We're all nerds here, MLS nerds. The thing I wanted to do was like this notion of primary marketplace, and the MLS has to have it, right? The issue is we now have disingenuous office exclusives. And the difference between the two is coming soon at least was on Zillow, right? So at a minimum, a buyer agent could go on Zillow and find properties that were being marketed as coming soon. Now it's an office exclusive. I would argue that it's worse than coming soon, because now if I want to find out about quote office exclusive, I have to belong to that brokerage.
So I don't know if we know that. I think that's the big thing. I'm not going to make a broad conclusion. We know that pocket listings are up. Now,
Right.
2.4, if we believe Glenn's numbers, which I have no
Right.
reason not to, 2.4 to 4% is a big change, but it's still
Right.
4%. We know it's more than that in some hot markets. We don't
10%
know.
is the number that Glenn mentioned in certain
some
markets.
markets.
Minneapolis, I think he mentioned.
Yeah.
Chicago, yeah.
Right. So then, we look at, well, what was going to be listed off MLS before and now is an office exclusive versus what, might have been forced into the MLS based on marketing policy. We don't really know. We know that in a hot market, as nobody expected COVID, I mean, this basically went into effect right during COVID.
Right before, yeah.
So, really hot fires to test out new policies in, I guess.
Yeah.
But so I don't think we know, but I think we do all have a feeling that there are a large number of folks who in the past wanted to double-side deals or didn't want to deal with a heavy labor transaction. So they talked to clients and told them the easy answer, which was, hey, I can get you this price without doing a lot of work. And I think they've decided now we should do that as an office exclusive. I don't know what the numbers are there. Right. And I think that bothers people philosophically still, that there's a feeling that in some cases, agents may not be giving sellers who truly want exposure and full market value. They may not be getting that because of the easy out. We don't get, but it's very hard to measure. It's hard to see. I think to Glenn Kelman's point, whether you're talking about underrepresented communities or whether you're just talking about people who just don't have the right kinds of connections, you can take anybody who just doesn't happen to run in the right circle, know the right people, who know the right brokers, who live in the right neighborhood with the right country club, and they're not getting access to the detriment of the seller,
right,
to the detriment of the buyer, to the detriment of the MLS, and most importantly, in my opinion, for this conversation, to the detriment of the reputation of the agents and the brokers and organized real estate, that that there are reasons for a listing to not be publicly marketed, which you can do through a private listing to sell FSBO. I mean, how long would it take you to sell a home right now if you didn't want the world to know, if you just whispered to your neighbors that you were thinking about selling?
Right.
3 days, and you'd have a dozen other neighbors that would know about your home for sale. So if we're just looking for a quick sale, it's pretty easy ways to do that. You've got iBuyers. If you want some of the MLS exposure, but you don't want internet advertising, you list it with an MLS participant and you opt out of internet advertising, but you still get the brokerage world. So it gets to be a question of what is the point of the office exclusive at this point? What does it do?
My opinion, man.
I personally feel like it doesn't do anything for consumers at this point.
No, of course not.
Of course not.
Of course not. But here's the thing: like the disingenuous coming soon, which I love. I mean, that's just a wonderful phrase, right? I mean, that had nothing to do with consumer benefit. It had nothing to do with helping sellers. disingenuous office exclusives also have nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with what I've been talking about for what now, 3 years? The FOMO effect. It's all about brokerages being able to use it in order to generate this notion of exclusivity and go out and recruit agents and beat the shit out of other brokers. I mean, that's what it's always been about, right? And I'm like, I didn't come up with this, right? This is our good friend Andrew Flackner, who just literally wrote like network effect and exclusive. Like he kind of laid out the whole map, and I'm like, that's what it's always been about. So the issue now, as I see it, is so two things, and we have so many points I want to get to, but let me see if I could get some agreement here. Number one, we both agree that what we want to get to, right, is some place where professionals should have access to all the information about everything that's in the market so they don't look like morons in front of consumers. I mean, can we agree on that? Right?
Sure.
However we get there, we want that. Number two, I guess I'm wondering, would you agree that disingenuous office exclusives are worse than disingenuous coming soon? Simply because at least disingenuous coming soon was on Zillow, Realtor, these portals that were out there.
I'm not sure if I would say it was better. I would say they're both problematic.
They're both problematic. I'm saying one's worse than the other.
Well, you're talking about the net effect of one. One of them is actually following the rules. One of them is just skirting them in a strange way. But yeah, to your point, I think they're both negative. Again, personal opinion. You're going to find businesses that absolutely believe that this is the best thing for their clients. Again, I would say I can tell you 5-6 different ways that you can give a seller the privacy, the ease of transaction, the lack of buyers traipsing through their home whenever they want. Those are all solvable without an office exclusive. So at the end of the day, one of them probably is more of a detriment to the MLS itself.
That's what I'm getting at. Because office exclusives don't even have to be entered into the MLS.
And there was a real point for them originally when we had a sort of more simplified system, in particular, when we got a 50-year-old policy. That even if we looked back 17 years ago when it was added to the antitrust provisions, and I want to talk about that for a second too, real quick, that didn't even think about the way that listings would be shared across, Zillow and Realtor.com and all these HomeSnap marketplaces, and they just didn't have to think in that manner at the time. So now we come to a point today where we need to reassess and say, do we need that anymore? And I think we've given brokers and consumers in particular more options where we probably don't need that. But again, this is just one person, and you have to get brokers, agents, MLSs, associations to all agree that maybe that's the next step. I see the comment, if it looks like a duck. This is how we feel a lot of times when our associates in the industry who've done something for a long time, they're not bad people. They're not trying to do it bad. They've just done it for a long time. And we all need to reassess it together and say, does this hold up to today's scrutiny? Because there are a lot of bright lights and eyeballs on us right now.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that it doesn't, right? The current situation truly sucks ass, right? So, like I said, I mean, my thing now is I was agreeing with Glenn Kelman's call for NAR to do something about office exclusive, like today. He said do it in November. I'm like, no, do it now. Like, what's like? There's no reason to wait. There's absolutely no reason to wait.
Well, so that's, I mean, if you want to make this really boring, let's go into what actually has to happen. Because
let's not, and let's see if we can answer some of these questions. First of all, I guess I don't see any questions. I see a lot of comments.
Any rule that's in the antitrust provisions in NAR's policy with the current atmosphere with class action lawsuits in the DOJ, there's a lot of work to be done to get something like that to happen. But let's get people to agree today. Sure, absolutely.
And at least like start the process, right? I mean, if we just obviously if we all kind of said, okay, this is something we got to tackle, something we got to tackle. Now, what do we actually want? I guess is the question, right? So we agreed. What would such a policy look like? To me, it looks like the primary marketplace rule, right? To me, right? Which is to say, you can do whatever the hell you want in terms of marketing, as long as it is in the MLS first. In other words, I would just advocate for allow coming soon, allow for people to do exclusive marketing, whatever you want, as long as it's the MLS first. right? So that I'm trying to avoid the realtor look like a moron problem. Right? I mean,
yeah, so that's one side of it, to make the realtor look like they know what they're doing because they participate with others and are supposed to cooperate. But the other side is what Glenn spoke about, which is this is not selling video games and cell phones. Like, people have licenses in real estate for a reason. And it's because this is important to the country, to the community.
No,
Again, you see me going down the Boy Scout side. You can't just take housing opportunities and lump them in with some other marketing rule set here.
If this were important to the country, we would require more than like 40 hours of fucking classes before you can get a real estate license. So
you don't have to get a license to sell a cell phone. But my point being, so you're talking about the primary marketplace concept, which was interesting. I liked a lot of that. I think what most people in the MLS space right now are asking is, do we need to have a participate or don't question?
Right.
Because brokers don't have to join the MLS. They don't have to join the association.
That's right.
That's right. And so
I like that.
Maybe you are a private broker and you do things that aren't done in the MLS space. And that's okay.
Rex does that. I mean,
Rex does it, and then they complain a lot because they don't get access to MLS services, which is interesting. But if you're looking at, folks who do most of their business in the MLS, almost all their business. I know you said, exclusive inventory. I'd advise the brokers to do this. When we managed, we could have in the past held listings out of the MLS, but we always told agents, just put it in the MLS. Stop being so cute. Don't be tricky. You're great, experienced agents. Get it in the MLS. If you need to exclude it from internet advertising, we can do that. If you need the listing agent to show up for every single showing and get a pre-approval letter before showing to a buyer, you can do that. But let's be in or out. Northwest MLS has done a lot of this already, which is an interesting sort of, example. And then let's find out, are there really a lot of sellers that really want to work with a broker that's not an MLS member? That's okay if that's what happens. But it's sort of an either or at a certain point for the MLS. And that's kind of what I think I've been seeing in a lot of the comments lately is, are we going to do this or not? Are we going to participate or are we not going to?
Right. But I think we're better off doing that now, right? Now. Because the way I see it is, if you let this be, and look, Sam, I get what you're saying. Like when you were a manager brokerage, you did the right thing. You told agents to just put in the MLS. But I'm just telling you, like, if my issue is I'm a big brokerage and my margins just getting absolutely pounded, right? And I got to figure out how to get more agents. I got to figure out how to get more transactions. Like, I absolutely do exclusive inventory strategies. I mean, when Compass kind of came out with their whole flywheel thing, I thought it was really smart. I really did. And Clear Cooperation put a big stop on that. But now all Compass has to do is move to an office exclusive strategy. Every single listing is going to be an office exclusive. Right.
Lots of companies are doing more office exclusives.
Absolutely, and it makes sense, right? It makes sense, which is why.
It makes sense if your end intent is to capture buyers and sellers, which it is.
That's right.
But the question is there a long-term degradation of the marketplace?
Of course.
By doing that.
Of course.
And I mean, it's funny just looking at the comments here, because we paint this as if, well, we'll just get rid of office exclusives and everything will be good. We know there will be some other end around. There will be something agents do. There will be something that, they get creative about. It's a compliance, it's difficult for the staff. That being said, that doesn't mean we don't keep making better rules to make it clearer and clearer as to how to do that. And MLSs will get better and better at figuring out how to comply, how to enforce compliance. We're about a year into this right now. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of pain points, but that doesn't mean they're arguing that it's not better now that we don't have these disingenuous coming soons. They may feel their current job is worse.
I don't know, man.
The fact that we have more office exclusive inventory potentially does not say that that's 100% because of Clear Cooperation. We're in weeks of inventory right now, weeks. Whereas
I got to disagree with you, brother.
You don't know how much it is from either side.
No, here's why. Because if we didn't have Clear Cooperation policy, we would not have so many office exclusives. We would just have more coming soon. Right? And we agreed that coming soon, disingenuous though it may be, is still slightly better than disingenuous office exclusives. Because those aren't in the MLS at all.
But we do have a lot of MLSs that adopted a true coming soon now.
That's right, but I know. But here's the thing: if you adopt coming soon in the framework of clear cooperation policy that specifically carves out a safe harbor for doing office exclusives, why would
It's
I do
not.
that?
We've
I,
spoken about that. It's not a
dude,
safe
it
harbor.
totally does. I
It
mean,
was already
it's like
there.
it's in writing.
Clear cooperation does not carve out anything.
It absolutely
It
carves
merely
out.
refers to another. That was already there. That safe harbor already lived for 50 years. Clear cooperation adds a marketing component that happens to touch on that.
Okay, fine. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to debate. I don't want to start pulling up documents. Though I'm just suggesting. I actually think it's worse now. That's all I'm getting at. Which is why I think clear cooperation policy is a disaster in the making. If we're going to undo this, we have to get rid of this loophole, and then we got to restart the whole conversation. Like, what is it we're trying to achieve, right? What we're trying to achieve is cooperation. What we're trying to achieve is, and I go back to this. Let's not make realtors look like dumbasses. Right? Like, I belong to the MLS. I pay money to belong to the association. I do this so that I know more than the consumer does. It's nonsense, right? If the consumer goes to find the property on Zillow and I don't know anything about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, that's what we're trying to avoid. At the same time, you know, I know that there have been complaints from listing agents, listing brokers that, you know, this constrains their ability to market and do innovative coming soon marketing. I'm like, look, if that's what you want to do, I kind of feel like we're almost better off letting them do that, right? As long as we then say, fine, you want to do that type of marketing, do that, as long as the way you do it, right, is not going to make another member of the MLS, another realtor, look like a dumbass.
Well, that's a lot of what clear cooperation does. I mean, it's got to be available in the MLS. It doesn't have to be advertised in the MLS. It's just got to be there so they can see it.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at the comments, Tanya, you know, pointing out all the ways that agents have another 6 arrows in their quiver if they want to get around the next version by not signing listing agreements, getting marketing agreements. We know that's there. We know that's a big thing. So, you know, to your point, if what it is people are trying to affect is to make office exclusives go away, sure, we can say now, but what does now mean? Does it mean just rallying people and getting them angry? No, it means having people sit down and start talking about, is this reasonable in this kind of environment? At what point do you get, let's say, fair housing organizations to weigh in? Do you need to look at regulatory agencies and say, hey, we've got something, I know you don't like it, and that's why you don't sit in those committee meetings that we sit through.
No. What I don't like is, like, the minute we start bringing in like racial issues and fair housing crap into this, I feel like we're gonna go nowhere, right? Like, this has nothing to do with any of that. This has to do with a fundamental rule of the MLS, fundamental rule of the industry, right? And so to some extent, it comes down to, what does cooperation actually mean, right? To some extent, it does come down to that. Some extent it goes down to some of the fundamental discussions we need to have about what is the role of the MLS and all of that. Why do you belong, etc. Right? And I think my ultimate goal is I want to save the MLS, right? Because on the current path, I actually do see a real risk to MLS participation, period. Right? At some point, right? Because again,
go ahead.
Let me cite a couple stats at you. I've been finding out over the last couple of years. And I've been talking about it in various presentations, and I think I put up a couple of posts about this. It's actually shocking how few brokerage participants you have to get to, right, before you get to 51% of all the listings in an MLS, right? So one example I like to give is in one MLS I know of, because I have their data, with 1,100 total brokerages, it only takes 10 brokers to get to 51% listings. If those 10 brokerages decide to go office exclusive on every single one of their listings, the MLS may not exist. Like, what's the point, right?
Well, it's interesting when you look at the marketplace, and you have some markets where one broker has 30+%, and you can get to 50% with probably 4 or 5 brokers. Why haven't they left today?
It's a great question, man. And here's my thing. I think those brokers are asking themselves that right now.
So you may be right. I think they've asked themselves that forever. And I think they've seen that the benefits of the marketplace for their agents still make sense to be in the MLS. I want to go back to you on the fair housing thing, not because I think that's a primary component of this, but I think it's an important one. You know, I mean, you've talked about, you know, why is the MLS important? Well, it's important for everybody to be able to have access. It's just, it's a marketplace that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
So whether you want to touch on racial issues or not, which I think you've touched, when we looked at the Newsday issues, with fair housing and with people being steered to certain neighborhoods, the MLS as transparency is probably the most powerful part of the MLS from a consumer benefit perspective.
Sure.
So if people aren't allowed to see properties because they're sitting in whatever exclusive, private, non-exposure sort of status with an agent, this is where people are excluded. And you can, if you don't want to make it a fair housing thing, let's just say the poor kid in whatever neighborhood from whatever background he's from, and his parents don't know that there's a listing available down the street for whatever reason. So, from the professional side, I totally agree that there's a reason those 30% market share brokers haven't left the MLS, because the MLS is good for the overall business, because they're all better. Their whole playing field is leveled up for everyone with it. But clear cooperation is a point in time on a continuum. So if people want to move things forward, if they want to get more than where we are right now, then identify what that next step is. Now, you and Glenn have had a very specific part. You've been talking about it for a long time.
Yep.
There are a lot of reasons that people in the policy-making groups have not tried to bite off that section of the elephant yet, and now have the discussion. Is it time to have that bite? Personally, I think it's time to have that discussion. Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see if the brokerage community is willing to have it. There's a reason we did things like one business day for turn-in on clear cooperation, which MLS execs hate by and large.
Yeah.
Because the listings go in on Friday and they're not turned into the MLS on, until Monday. The brokerage community asked for it. And it was one of those things that we said, this is pragmatic. If the brokers aren't on board, clear cooperation doesn't move. We could probably move that too. We could probably upload that facet.
All right. Look, obviously I have a bunch of detailed thoughts, and I don't know how much nerdery we want to get into. But let's see what comments there may be here. Any questions? Let's see. Here's an interesting one. Bill Wendell, just 3 brokers can manipulate 65% of inventory. Compass data goes top 20. Rex goes, but they don't have that yet. Ability to share info is cooperation. Cooperation doesn't mean compensation, from Marcy Rugao. Some good comments. Man, our comment section is this is awesome.
We needed a moderator to get these.
I know, really. Matt Fowler, network is so important. We have to preserve that part of this. 50+% is not enough. 70% is not enough. Imagine missing 3 out of 10 listings your buyers might want. Now, that's a really good point that Matt is suggesting, right? I guess what I'm getting at is, and maybe this is a larger point, I think we would love it if all brokers and agents, sort of thought about what's good for the industry as a whole, right? I think that would be wonderful. I think some brokers do that. But here's the thing. You can't really think about the industry as a whole or really care that much about it if you're going to go out of business. And I think the piece that's missing from this is the financial weakness of brokerages over the last 10 to 20 years. And we just haven't taken that into account. Right? So there comes a point where you're looking at like 1% margins, when you're looking at just these, like, you're not making any money from brokerage stuff. You have to go, all right, you know what? I would love to be able to do these things, but I got to stay in business. How do I do that? I create the FOMO effect. I go through that whole cycle. I need to take over. I'm terrified of competitors. Think about the fear that someone like Compass, created. Think about the fear that someone like EXP is creating among a lot of brokerages. And then you have boutiques out there. So until we can figure out a system that is not simply relying on people's sort of good intentions, and their moral behavior, like, what's the phrase? If men were angels, we wouldn't need government, right? Like, that's one of the things I would look at. Is because, again, I'm not on any of those policymaking bodies. You are, Sam, and some of the people in the points here. I guess all I would urge is really try to look at rules and systems that's not going to rely on people's professionalism or their code of ethics.
Sure.
Like, try to rely on people's self-interest, right? That's what I'm getting at. And I don't know exactly what that is, right? But I do think a part of it has to be something like, look, if you think that doing a coming soon marketing strategy is in your self-interest, we have to somehow allow you to do that. but along the way, couple it to something that allows us all to benefit, right? Allows cooperation, allows the network itself to somehow survive. We've got to figure it out.
Well, there's got to also be a better way of highlighting agents' license duties. I mean, these are not soft things. Fiduciary duties, statutory duties, depending on the state. It's not about what's best for the agent. It's about what's best for their client. So there's a reason we have laws. There's a reason we have rules. We're not depending on everybody's good nature. But the fear that you point to is not just about the brokerage that's worried about its margins. It's about a publicly traded company who reports to its investors every quarter. The investors do not care about the cooperative marketplace unless it's good for the business. Now, those of us who know the overall business would be much worse without it, obviously spend too many hours unpaid fighting to keep it viable.
Hold on a second. Here's the thing, though. If I'm an investor, if I'm a hedge fund manager, right, and I look at the earnings multiple of a Realogy, or I look at the earnings multiple of a Compass, and then I look at the earnings multiple of CB Richard Ellis, or Jones Lang LaSalle. In other words, commercial brokerages who are in an industry that there is no MLS, there is no cooperation compensation, pocket listings and office exclusives are the norm. Dude, there's an argument to be made. Yeah, this might drag the rest of the industry down, but hey, Compass, I absolutely want you to go after this strategy as a shareholder in Compass, right? Because those guys are many times larger. So I think this is kind of, and Eric Stegman just pointed this out. That's what I'm getting at. Like MLS rules, association rules, all of these rules that we have to somehow allow people to be more profitable somehow, right? It has to allow for business to be done instead of just putting limits on it. You know what I mean? Like,
well, so usually we try to find yes and policies whenever possible, right? I mean, just you have fewer regulators looking, into your meetings if you're saying, yes, you can do that and do this. And that's what clear cooperation was. Sure, you can put it on Zillow, but you're a participant, so put it on the MLS as well. Very straightforward. I don't know if we have to have rules that help people make money besides lifting the foundation of the marketplace, but we
can't hurt them, though, is what I'm getting at.
No, and I think that's the point that you're going to find that's where the pushback's going to be. You're going to have brokers who say, I want to have my cake and eat it too, even though I hate
Of course.
I want to serve my client at their highest level exposure, except when I don't want to.
That's right.
And
it's human nature, man.
Models, and one of them is very in line with the license you've been granted by a government organization, and one of them may not be. So that's a tough thing to cover, obviously. But that's why the MLS has rules, because brokers are all individually motivated, and they agree to a cooperative rule set that will inherently limit them all. This idea that NAR stop making policies, stop making rules, just let us do what we want locally. Well, the MLS literally exists to take away a little bit of freedom from everyone who's involved. You have to all agree to do some things in the same way. So again, you've asked this before. Yes, I am in favor of national policies. I'm in favor of technology efficiency, about certainty for practitioners, about transparency and accuracy for consumers. And we can do that with stronger MLS rules. Now, it doesn't have to be everything, but it should be things that enhance that cooperation and transparency at the MLS level. And then we've got all kinds of other local idiosyncrasies we can go through. But I think, again, you haven't been wrong this entire time. I may have thought you were wrong on your approach and timing.
Of course.
But I'm sitting in the sausage making rules. I think Glenn's right. Whether or not you think it's a fair housing issue, it's a market access issue.
It is an issue.
A reputation of organized real estate issue at the bottom line. That really just makes it look like the folks are not looking out for their customers. So looking at these, Bill Wendell's got some big ones in there about the small broker getting hurt, which is an interesting one because a small broker obviously can't do office exclusive listings the way a big would. A small broker has always been limited compared to a big broker because the big broker had office exclusives 30 years ago too. But it's a good point. There's there are differences there with the way it's lined up. Glenn's just calling out the brokerages on their outdated and failing business models anyway.
think we need a conference, man. We need an in-person conference.
Yeah, we should just do a big
LobbyCon.
Zoom and just blow this up the next time.
Oh yeah, because that'll be real orderly and organized.
You know what? We just had a research session with 200 people, and it went for 3 hours. It can be done. People can be under control. So,
well, you know, speaking of, why don't you guys do that? When's your next big thing? Maybe RESO is the right venue for this sort of thing. I know it's standards, so you don't really talk about rules and policies, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly talk about rules. It's not 100% data standards, but it's mostly data standards. But this is more, you know, it's the MLS membership. That's what this is, and certainly RESO membership has a ton of MLS membership. Correct. But it's NAR, but it's also the rest of the brokers in broker-owned MLS. If Northwest MLS went out and did this, because the brokers in a broker-owned MLS said, we don't need office exclusives. Mm-hmm. You're not going to pre-market. And we do have, you know, this really interesting component we're going to talk about this week is whether you need an address in an MLS listing or not as a requirement. And because they have no office exclusives, they have this component where a super celebrity can, you know, have an undisclosed address. You know, that's a total paradigm shift, but it's worth considering if we're going to an environment when there aren't office exclusives. And we should have those leaders of those organizations come out, you know, to bigger forums and talk about, my God, if we could all get together and just be at the hotel bar and hammer this out, it would be amazing sometime later in conference season. But we need more visibility on that. And I could see you having a broker and MLS sort of summit of leaders. Now, obviously, we've got to be transparent and, you know, with that sort of process, but saying how might we move to that next step? We can start now. There's a lot that's going to have to be done because at the end of the day, this is NAR. That's a very specific place where those rules are set, and they're going to be pragmatic and make sure it's done in the right way. I know we've got people in the chat. Bill Loveland's here with the chat. He'll be involved in that conversation without a doubt. Tanya, MLS rules keep participants on the right side. Yeah. We have rules for a reason. And nobody likes giving up that individualism, whether it's the brokerage or the agents, but it just makes for a more effective marketplace.
And look, I mean, the way I look at it, if we boil this down to certain things, right? If we look at it from a consumer standpoint, what we're saying, and I think what Glenn may be suggesting is all buyers need to have access to all properties. That seems to be kind of the gist, right? Like if you are a buyer in residential real estate, you should somehow be able to access all of the properties that are for sale out there, right?
That sounds like the gist of his argument. Yes.
Yeah. And the question, I guess, from the industry standpoint is, why do we say no to that?
It's a good question. It's a totally different paradigm than where we are right now. You know, we start from kind of the opposite end is we should, you know, get as many as possible outside of, you know, maybe different consumer preferences, but let's offer some things versus everything's going in unless we have some really tight specific reason why it's not going into the MLS. And we don't have to say MLS, all buyers should get access, but let's be honest, the MLS is the framework to get that kind of a situation. So, you know, if you're licensed and you are representing consumers, you know, how do you ensure that you're making that property available appropriately to, you know, anyone in the buying public, and what sort of exceptions might there exist where that doesn't happen? And I think we've come from the marketing up to exceptions as opposed to this version you're proposing, which is kind of a top-down everything except. And it's good. It's a good question. It's a good question,
right? Because then that we're bringing everything to like sort of full circle to the whole like, you know, coming soon and, you know, like the whole idea, right? And I think I've been seeing what is it? I know I saw this comment for Eric Stegman keeps asking like, what is the problem if the seller says I want an office exclusive, right? And
what is the problem?
Right. I mean, there's something to consider.
The question is, a seller has never said I want an office exclusive. A seller has said I want this and this. And that may have
what do you mean this and this? What does the seller say?
Well, maybe the seller said I don't want people traipsing through my house. And so maybe they were offered an office exclusive, or maybe they were offered listing agent, scheduled showings, attended, so that people only came through the house between these 45 minutes on these days. I don't know who offered what. Maybe they said, I don't want everybody on the internet to see my address. And maybe they were offered an office exclusive, and maybe they were offered an internet opt-out on MLS. But you can do all these things without office exclusive. So it's actually something you hear from agents a lot too. Like, if my seller asked me for an office exclusive, and my immediate response would be, but what did your seller really ask you for? Because it might be an office exclusive, but it's probably features that led you to office exclusive. And that's kind of this weird thing where we put these silos in place and think that they're perfect for consumers, but it's not this or that. There's a whole bunch of features, and you've got to figure out what's best for that client.
Okay.
So in the comments here, Marcy's saying, if you don't want to follow the ethics rules and the MLS rules, then don't join. So that's what I'm hearing in the MLS space too. Is I think it was Richard Gibbons who commented earlier. Clear Cooperation 2.0 is participate or GTFO.
Okay. So here's an interesting comment. Check this out. I mean, there have been a number of comments here about sellers don't, request office exclusive. They don't request coming soon. They don't request any of that stuff. They get steered there by the agent, right? Bill Lublin said that. Sellers don't go there by themselves. We sold tens of thousands of homes, and only once did I ever see a seller not want the benefit of the MLS because they had a crazy ex-spouse. Okay, how about this?
I love Bill. Bill cuts to the chase.
I know. So, and there's, typical around privacy, Alex Lang. We have clients who want to high price, don't like the optics, even address. Okay, how about this? What if the rule were, everything goes in. No coming soon, no office exclusive, no nothing. Everything goes in, okay? If you want a variance, right? If you want essentially a one-time waiver, right, like a special permission, your seller must write like a 3-page essay explaining why.
Well,
what if we did something like that? I mean, what would be the problem with that? I know I'm being a little bit facetious here, but
you're actually not. It kind of exists.
Okay.
So in most MLSs, there's just a form that they sign, and the MLS makes the letters bigger and all caps and in yellow, and the agents that sign this anyway.
Right.
In Northwest MLS's model, you have to submit why, and it is scrutinized by the MLS. And I know this personally because I had a client who had family members who were highly connected in government and wanted their seller name and their address just not disclosed to the marketplace because there's no office exclusives. And they're denied regularly. You don't just get it because you asked for it. There's an objective, committee. I think it's committee process, but it might be staff.
That might even be better. Like literally, you have to go through an interview. Like the seller submits like a form, and the MLS calls him up. Hey, so I see you requesting a variance from this rule. Tell us why. And like an interview, like that would be really interesting.
It's a private service. So if they didn't want to be a part of the MLS, if they didn't want to work with a broker who was a participant in the MLS, they wouldn't have to submit to that process. But if they did want MLS exposure and broker marketing, but they didn't want their name or their address shown, then that's maybe just one of the limitations of that service. But maybe on the
MLS side, because this then hopefully becomes a very rare occurrence, you could say price hidden at request of seller or whatever, right? If you want the address, if you want the price, then maybe your agent's able to go in and get it. I don't know. There's got to be some rules around that, but I don't know. I mean, what's wrong with an approach like that? Basically saying, listen, you can have variance from anything, any rule, as long as the seller requests it, and we as the MLS are pretty confident because through whether it's 3-page essays or you have to be interviewed by a committee or whatever, right? That you have to explain why, and that way you really get to informed consent, right? And that keeps coming up here.
It puts an objective body in the place of deciding when we talked about disingenuous versus real, right?
Right.
If one agent comes in and says all of my clients need their name and address obscured every time,
right? Bullshit. Get out of here.
Maybe they're the Seattle Seahawks agent, right? It's possible but you need to tell us why.
Yeah.
So Glenn Phillips actually has a good one here too. So he said, I submit even most sellers who think they want an exclusive could be talked out of it with an agent who's not self-serving. So if you look at the conversation we're having this week about do you need to have an address in the MLS
Yeah.
list? And Santa Barbara's got a ton of celebrities, ton of rich folks. They want that. Interestingly, they've got this privacy status. And I think the numbers the last time we heard were only 19 listings went into the status. So it's not a big group. But the majority of properties that did not sell in this privacy status ended up going active on the MLS and exposing their address.
Yeah.
So you could probably say, and again, I don't know enough of the details, but what it looks like is that the vast majority of consumers that were convinced to not expose their address or to not get full exposure were actually comfortable with sharing their address to the public because they did. In practice, they showed it. And it's another one of these things where we create these really complex gimmicks to try to convince sellers that they don't want exposure, when the vast majority of them, if they were just told the honest truth, it'll be fine. Get the exposure. We'll, cover a lot of your privacy and efficiency issues and everything else. So it just seems like this could be a lot simpler.
Right.
And I want to see people write essays too. So I like that angle.
I like that angle. All right. So listen, when the policymaking body meets again, maybe the suggestion from this little conversation is think about going like hardcore no. Like no. But with a variance, right? So you can actually get permission to vary from any of it. In other words, like you must show address. If you don't want to show an address, your client has to come in and meet with the committee and you have to write a 3-page SAY, right? Like actually making it more than just sign this and I'll get it done. Like you got to actually put in work, right? So that the MLS committee knows, no, this is real. No one's going to do this for a disingenuous purpose kind of thing. Now, having said that, we have a question from Bill Wendell to both of us. What do you think will happen to these off-market as a strategy when current runaway seller's market turns into buyer's market?
I mean, it'll do what it always has done, right? All of a sudden, you've got to serve your seller with full exposure, and we're going to get that thing out on the MLS and in front of the other brokers. I would imagine that's, exclusive inventory is not sexy when nobody can sell a home. So, yeah, you'd imagine it would go right back the other direction. That seems to be the natural direction. There's an interesting one here, too, with, hey, Alex Lang. How you doing? Good to see you. Consumer has little knowledge of the MLS. Yeah, it's about, all they care about is their experience in their transaction, which is a great point. They think Zillow's the MLS. They think any public-facing Redfin, whoever they're logging into a website, maybe it's a big Remax franchisor or something, they don't know the structure. And so it's incumbent on the agent to either explain to them that 99% of the time, maybe more, you absolutely will benefit from this, or it's up to rules to ensure that the agents do what they're supposed to do. You get people who complain a lot that all these sneaky agents are doing all these sneaky things. I don't think they are, by and large, but it's just those fringes. When there's not a rule, where there's a little bit of question, there's a gray area, they feel like they're following the rules and they're being creative and they're getting around this corner or that corner. I mean, that's just what independent marketing and sales people do. Course. So we need more clarity. We just need more clarity, more straightforward rules, more straightforward practice.
Actually, I think we need more than clarity, but because you and I were specifically asked to talk about this by our friend Jennifer Archambault, right? Clarity is one thing, Sam. Enforcement's the other, right?
Well, so clarity can lead to...
So let's talk about enforcement a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, one of my issues with clear cooperation policy as it's currently written is that it's actually fairly difficult to enforce. Right.
Is that it?
Maybe you don't agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, because it requires things, like the 1 business day rule. Like, okay, how are we enforcing that? Right. Like the idea is once you market it publicly, you have to put in the MLS within 1 business day. Okay, what's market publicly, right? Somebody has to go track that down, get evidence of it, blah, blah, blah. And then what, you're going to have to toll the thing. Okay, what I mean? It just, the enforcement becomes a little bit difficult, Right.
It's not easy, without a doubt. I mean,
Yeah.
we put that on ourselves. We said if we're going to run a cooperative and we're going to have rules that mean something, then we're going to have enforcement, and we're going to have interpretations. I got to enjoy some of the policy of writing some of the FAQs for portions of that. There are a lot of people involved in that process. What is public marketing?
Yeah.
But sure, is it complex? Yes. Is that a reason to not do it? So there's this thing that we do a lot in the industry. People get up on stage at an event and they say, well, agents are going to do it anyway. So what? That's not how you run a business. That's not how you create a marketplace, by saying, well, it's complex. Well, it's hard. Well, agents are going to do it anyway. That's not compliance or enforcement. So while it's understandable that there are a lot of execs and staff members who have had a hell of a year figuring out compliance here, that's not a surprise. This is a hard year as any to do that. It's not going to get easy ever. It's a complex thing to manage, but it's what the will of the brokers and the agents and the associations have said. This is how we want our marketplace to work. So what do we need to do? Do we need to team up on compliance? Do we need better guides? Do we need consolidation so you've got a big enough staff to do compliance? Maggie pointed out half the time the agents don't even report these things. Jennifer, I think it was Jennifer, might have been somebody else who just said some of the MLSs just don't want to have to deal with it, so they just don't enforce any of it.
They don't, right?
So now everybody in the marketplace is even angrier because they don't have access to the inventory. They have a rule that's not being enforced, and it just feels even worse. But at the end of the day, if we've got a rule that's correct and will improve the marketplace, not being able to do a good job of supporting it yet is not a reason to walk it back. Making it better, creating a picture of what you need to be able to do at your organization to enforce this, which we can get from large regionals who, are doing a good job, but also struggling in some cases with that. But again, we're a year in, we're on a continuum here of getting a more transparent, more cooperative, more efficient marketplace. So let's take that next step. And it's not just going to be Sam coming to the committee and saying, hey, let's go big. We need to see Glenn Kilman and Robert Refkin and Ryan Schneider saying, yes, this is what, Adam Contos and Glenn Sanford saying, yes, we don't need office exclusives anymore. That's not really part of our business model. We want to be transparent with the marketplace. That's how you get movement on this sort of thing. And I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah, no, I think that'll be interesting. So I think I'll say this about the enforcement and rules. There is a way to engineer rules so it's easier to enforce, right? So once again, I go back to allow nothing, and then variation by specific permission. That is way easier to enforce, right, than anything that kind of gives you 24-hour safe harbor and defining this type of marketing versus that type of marketing. I mean, I just feel like maybe when we take this up again, what the committee, whoever needs to be thinking about this is go with easier to enforce would be all of it is not allowed, right? Unless you have a specific variance permission from the MLS to say, okay, you know what? You have a celebrity client, you have a domestic abuse situation. We have the paperwork from, and actually we interviewed the seller. We understand you're okay. That way, it's much easier to enforce that, right? At that point, if you don't want to enforce it, it's just because you just don't want to enforce anything. It's like that. At that point, it's not about the rules. It's not about NAR. It's not about policy. It's about your local MLS and your local AEs and your local staff or whatever. I mean, that's a whole different issue. So it's just, kind of there. But there's a question here from Douglas Miller that I kind of want to get your take on it. His question is, why should NAR and the MLS be able to wipe out a discount brokerage model? The clear cooperation policy has wiped out the discount brokers model of helping consumers sell off MLS and then switching to MLS if consumers want that. I'm not entirely sure what model he's talking about there because that's not a help you sell. That's something else, right? What's he talking about?
There was maybe a lawsuit or something that was this help you sell related, but
Top Agent Network sued him, but that's not. I mean that's not really a discount broker
cooperation
model.
doesn't say anything about business models. It merely says if you want to put it out for public marketing, you need to put it in the MLS. So if you want to sell off market, but also advertise to the world, which is, I think, probably what's being alluded to, then Clear Cooperation said you're not participating.
Chris Carrillo here is agreeing with you. This is about business model. It's about transparency. But I mean, Douglas Miller also does say Help You Sell did do that, but it wiped out the model. So if the model was we're going to help you sell off MLS first by advertising to Zillow and wherever else at a lower price, but if I have to put it into the MLS, I have to pay a higher price. I mean, I guess I'm not really understanding.
So what gets interesting here is people allege, anti-competitiveness and antitrust when they're talking about wanting to protect their own business model versus protecting consumer choice.
Or competition itself, yeah.
Consumers can work with a company and be off MLS and advertise their listing to the world if they want to do that. Absolutely fine. But you can do that today. You can put it by yourself. You can work with an agent who's not an MLS participant, put it on Zillow. And then if you decide you want to be on the MLS, you can work with a broker. Any business model in the world. We've got a $500 entry fee broker at Northwest MLS, and you can put it on the MLS and you can show it to the world. So it's certainly different rules affect different companies differently. We spoke about that with big brokers versus small brokers, but they protect consumer choice and business competition.
I mean, I think I agree with that. So I guess an answer to kind of Douglas' question is, going back to Chris and you're saying, it's not about business models, it's about transparency. It's like, look, if we end up with Rob's preferred rule set, which is nothing is allowed, right? Nothing is allowed without, specific permission. Then maybe those business models suffer, but you know what? Then don't join the MLS, right? I mean, I feel like it's pretty simple. Because if you're not part of the MLS, like Rex is not part of the MLS, none of us care. Like, none of us have anything to say about that. You're an independent company doing what you do.
Because you want MLS services, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
In general, you have that opportunity. And you have a Zillow at your side to advertise your property to the world if you'd like to do that. So the idea that companies are under some sort of a strain right now, like, you've got more opportunities than ever for every consumer in the world to see your business and your property. And frankly, you've got portals that'll do it for you for free. So it's a really interesting argument there. Yeah, I see, Richard, you were right on my tail there with the antitrust protecting competition comment. So what you're suggesting is basically the Northwest MLS model. If you're a participant, everything's in. And you can't get out of any of that information unless there's a very specific thing, and you go submit to do that. So again, to be specific, what you need is the brokerage community and the MLS community to come together and say, we think we should remove this clause, which is in NAR's antitrust provisions, and be able to get legal guidance to say, this is actually no longer a consumer protection that we're protecting in these provisions. It's actually a consumer benefit for us to remove this mandatory requirement from MLS policies and get the feedback from the industry. And if that's what leadership thinks, again, getting insight from regulators, potentially legal guidance will help, because we don't want to make mistakes that embroil the association in those kinds of issues. But I think, as we've probably stated here, that could be a clear benefit to the consumer marketplace.
I think it'd be a clear benefit, and I think, so maybe it's the Northwest MLS, so I'm not familiar with Northwest MLS's, specific rules regarding this. But one of the I have a number of things around rules, right? One is that it should be really easy to understand, right? So you should know when you are breaking that rule, right? Number one. Number two, I think it should be really easy to enforce. And I like that sort of blanket prohibition with a, solid, clear justification, because that's really easy to enforce, right? Because if somebody reports, here's a office exclusive listing, it's like, guess what? That's real easy. Is it in the MLS? No? Okay, you're busted. It's easy to enforce.
I would get the automatic emails that said, hey, we saw a yard sign in this property. This is your agent, and it's not in the MLS. You've got 48 hours. And it's not
I wouldn't even do it. You got 48 hours. Like, no, you're busted. And then the penalties come.
It was an automatic penalty. But the penalties would escalate the longer that it took. So it's straightforward. It's different because Northwest MLS is broker owned and they don't have to follow NAR policy.
But I think that's the other thing, is maybe the issue here is we need the broker owned MLSs to do experiments like Northwest has done, because there are a few in the country, right? Maybe all of this like NAR and then the bureaucracy and the you know, the whole procedure and the process, like it brings in other issues. Maybe what we need is the broker-owned MLS to go and just try this, like follow NWMLS and just be like, listen, we're going to do it with all this nonsense. Here it is. If you're in the MLS, it's in the MLS. Period. End of story. If you don't want it in the, or if you want to hide stuff, or if you need time or whatever, go get your seller to show up at our committee meeting and justify why he needs it.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too far into who needs to show up at a committee meeting, you can have a boutique brokerage who only specializes in off MLS listings if that's what their business model is.
Sure.
And that's perfectly probably viable. And
I would still have the seller have to show up because it deals the steering problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do worry. Right. We always worry what kind of information is getting down all the way to the consumer.
Right. But here's Douglas Miller. He just said if the seller doesn't want to advertise to realtors, then they should be able to do that. And then if they decide they want to later, they should be able to do that too. And I'm saying yes. And I'm saying listen. But his point is I can't as an MLS member allow my seller to do that. I'm saying no, under this new Rob's rule that I just came up with, you can. The seller just has to show up to the MLS committee and explain why he doesn't want to advertise to realtors.
Well, so again, there are features like with Northwest MLS, if you want to hide your address or your owner name, like again, you show up to that committee meeting, you can do that. But again, we're talking about the consumer. We're not talking about protecting an individual broker. So
no, that's what I'm saying. I feel like the seller's got to show up. That's why, right? Well, it's like Eric Stegeman.
But to Douglas's question, as a seller, you could go list with somebody who doesn't list their property on the MLS. You can do that.
Yeah, but that's not, man. Come on,
Tell me what your case is for wanting to list your property, but you don't want it shared with the other brokers on the MLS.
I'm saying, who knows? Maybe, hold on. Here's my point, though. No, here's the point.
There's a broker who's not an MLS participant.
No, that's bullshit. There are no brokers who aren't MLS participants other than Rex.
There are a lot.
I don't believe it. I don't buy it.
They don't do a lot of transactions because they don't join the MLS.
Fine,
but
that's not really I'm saying it doesn't matter what the seller might say. What I'm suggesting is if you want to work with a help you sell, if you want to work with an MLS participant, we're going to let you do that. It's just that you, Mr. Seller, has to show up and explain. And here's the thing. What we're trying to avoid here is not allowing the seller to do what the seller wants. I actually think we should allow the seller to do whatever the hell the seller wants, right? However, it's short of fair housing violation. We can't be party to that, right? Sure. Short of that. But what we're trying to avoid is professional malfeasance. What we're trying to avoid is agents steering the seller into accepting something that the seller doesn't really even understand. So if it's obvious that the seller understands and is fully informed, and it's like, no, I don't want my properties advertised to realtors, but after 3 weeks, I might want to. Hey, you're the seller. Sure. What do we care?
So, yeah, I mean, we always worry about how they got coached up. Do they walk into a committee meeting with a speech to give to the MLS? But to your point, there's something there. I just wanted to address what's coming through the comments, which is, won't that cause brokerages to stand up a shadow brokerage behind the first one? And, one of them participates in the MLS, one of them doesn't. Now, I wish I had Renee Galicia and Rodney Gancho here to talk about specific policy, but don't quote me on this. But I'm going to tell you
should we try and bring Renee into this? Is he still here?
You could try. My understanding is that's actually not allowed. If you're a realtor member and you're a principal of a brokerage, then you are a realtor member, and you can't just go stand up a different brokerage and say, well, this one's a participant and this one isn't. Now, we all know in reality, you could probably call your cousin and have your cousin stand up a brokerage and have people list with them, but you start adding some cruft to the mix there. If you're trying to send your clients to one brokerage with one agent and then move them to another brokerage with another agent, you might be able to do it, but it's not this easy, simple process as it would be if there were no rules in place.
Right. So I don't know. I think this conversation, Sam, is helping me solidify my position on this. Right. And I think my position is coming down to blanket rule, allow nothing. Right. So as an agent, as a broker, it's not about business model. It's about transparency and cooperation. You agree to be part of the MLS because this is what the MLS provides, then that is what it is, period. The exception, though, is at the same time, as an MLS, we do not want to limit the seller's options. It's just that we have to understand, we really have to be convinced that it's the seller's option. Right? So as long as you show that really informed consent by the seller, I'm like, what do we care as an MLS? If the seller really says, you know what, again, as long as it's legally compliant, right? Right. So as long as we're not violating fair housing or some other law, if the seller says, listen, I want to try only marketing with hot air balloons for the first week, and then I'm going to have my agent only market to wealthy investors, and then I want to try this, and then if none of those work, then I'll put in the MLS. As long as the seller says this is what I want to do with my property, what do we care? Sure, right?
So I'm going to give you an assignment then, because you're going to be digging into Northwest MLS policy and see how it works. Because as you said, if you want the broker MLSs to experiment, well, this is many years into this experiment in Northwest MLS right now. So you can look at the policy, look at the rules. Okay. They're pretty short. You look at the pre-marketing rule, and it's pretty straightforward listing submission. And then, again, this is something that should just be I don't want to say a white paper because that sounds boring, and we
do another one of these.
Looks like, but certainly something that we should get the brokerage community in front of and say, is it time to do this? And the MLS community, is it time to move this next step? And if so, what kind of preparations do we need to make so we do it in an efficient way and don't, invite all the attorneys in the world in? Get it pragmatic and make it move.
Yeah, leave the lawyers out of it really as long as possible.
We'll keep our lawyers in to ensure other lawyers don't come in.
Look, I think that would be a good starting point. If that would be helpful, I'm happy to do that. But I think So I want to thank you, Sam, and thank the whole audience, because I feel like it's helping me at least figure out where I stand, right? And again, I could be wrong, and I could be convinced otherwise, but I do feel now my approach is, if you're a member at the MLS, if you're a professional, I'm sorry, this is what you signed up for, deal with it. You don't like it, be like Rex and leave the MLS. At the same time, we will allow pretty much every exception we can imagine, as long as we are convinced it's coming from the seller. Right.
Yeah, it's a logical position to be in. I want to thank you for changing your headline to "Clear Cooperation is a wonderful step on the way to a greater marketplace."
Yeah, no, I don't think it is a disaster in the making. We need to fix it soon. All right, hey everybody in the chat, thank you all so much for participating. I'm sorry we couldn't get to every comment, every question, but this was cool. Now that we kind of know how to do this, maybe we'll do it periodically, Sam.
We could definitely do it again, and we should still have a Zoom happy hour with this group, because
absolutely
coming so fast. I want to see them in person.
I know, and I would love. Hey, you organize happy hour, I'll be there. I don't know how to do Zoom happy hours with that many people. So, all right, cool.
We'll make it happen.
All right.
Thanks
everybody,
guys. Great seeing you, Rob.
All right, good to see you. Bye.